This week on Quadriga, Egypt divided, democracy in danger. Hundreds of thousands of Egyptians have been protesting for days in Cairo's Tahrir Square. The scenes are reminiscent of the popular uprising that brought down Egypt's former strongman, Hosni Mubarak. Now, the country's first democratically elected president, Mohammed Mursi, has triggered the people's outrage. Just months into office, Mursi gave himself sweeping new powers, leading opponents to label him Egypt's new pharaoh. Is Mursi leading Egypt back into dictatorship? Your host this week, Ali Aslan.
Hello and welcome to Quadriga. Tahrir Square in Cairo is once again capturing the attention of the international community, and the scenes look somewhat familiar, but only this time it's not Mubarak that people are revolting against, but the new president, Mohammed Mursi. What are his plans? What are his intentions? That is what we're going to talk about on today's show, together with three journalists who have been following the story very closely. Welcome to Samir Nasir, who is an award-winning German-Egyptian film director. Jan Kuhlmann is a freelance journalist whose work focuses primarily on the Arab world. And Thomas Hasel is a broadcast journalist who's specializing on the Middle East and North Africa in particular. Thank you all, gentlemen, for being here. Samir Nasir, somewhat déjà vu in Egypt. Once again, Tahrir Square being the focus of the international community. Everybody's scratching their heads. Everybody's wondering, what is Mursi up to? What are his intentions by announcing this decree giving him all-assuming powers? What do you make of this?
Well, I guess what we're seeing now is really a kind of déjà vu to things we have witnessed nearly 2 years before. It's very difficult for me really to say what President Mursi wanted to do, but what he did to Egypt and what he did to the people is that he made this declaration, and he didn't nearly have anybody. He didn't consult nearly anybody on this of the other political powers, and it was a big surprise that he came out with it like this. And as soon as he sensed that there was a kind of opposition to it, he spoke to the people, but he didn't speak to the people. He spoke to his followers of the Muslim Brothers last Friday, and that was a very bad signal. So I really fear that what is going on now is a way back to dictatorship, and it's a way back of not respecting the will of the people. Of course, and you said this in the opening statement. There is a big danger of really dividing the country, and I really think that a president who came in a very critical situation to power, and who announced and said several times that he is there to unite the country, I think he made this with a very heavy hand, and I really think that the last days were not really. It's not really the situation that you would say that things are getting calmer or better, and that's also déjà vu, because you have demands on the street are getting higher and higher, and you have a president who is somehow silent, who is not speaking to the people he didn't speak to the people, he only spoke to his people, and his rhetoric was very furious. It was really a rhetoric of war, not a rhetoric of uniting people. So that's very dangerous.
And things certainly are not getting calmer in Egypt these days, Jan Kuhlmann. This decree that Mursi announced, basically saying that all presidential decisions cannot be challenged by anyone. I mean, at the end of the day, he must have known that this decree and this announcement would have caused some sort of backlash, don't you think?
I think he should have known, and I think he made a big mistake. And I agree with you that he didn't try to find some allies within the democratic, secular, liberal groups. That was, I think, the biggest mistake. But on the other hand, the whole situation is much more complex. If you follow the media covering in the last days, you could get the idea that it's something like the good liberal Democrats fighting against the bad undemocratic Islamists. But it is not as easy as you might think It's much more complex, and the biggest problem is that you have a big group within the society, within the country, within the administration, which is a remain of the old system, which are something people following still Mubarak, and they try to boycott the process of democratization as much as they can. And you find a lot of these people within the judges, for example, in the courts, and this is the big problem. They're trying to boycott the process. I mean, they have dissolved the parliament, the constitutional court. They have dissolved the first constitutional assembly. They were about to dissolve the second constitutional assembly. And I think the main aim of the decree were these people from the old system who tried to boycott the process. And in the end, it's the right aim, but he chose the wrong means.
And it's not all black and white, as you said correctly, and we'll go into more detail in a second. But Thomas Hasel, first let's talk about the timing of the announcement. It came exactly a day after the Gaza ceasefire had been announced. International praise was placed upon Mursi, and the IMF agreed to lend him billions of dollars, as did the EU. Did Mursi try to seize this moment of international acclaim?
It seems so, and apparently he thought that the general public in Egypt would stand much behind him after he was made a kind of hero in getting the ceasefire between Gaza, between Hamas and Israel, and apparently he tried to use this windfall credit and go on with his own agenda, which was enlarge his own power and getting rid of opponents he had in the state system, as Mr. Kuhlmann was saying, like the general prosecutor, who he tried to get rid of before, but he was reinstalled, and now he did the second step, and finally maybe got rid of him now. But apparently he overestimated his popularity, and it's always good for a president or for anyone who's elected to really think about who was voting for him, how many people are behind me, and shouldn't I try to be, as he always says, a president for all Egyptians, not just for a small group. And that means you have to compromise, you have to discuss a lot, you have to talk to every parts of society. And I mean, there were bad signs already arising, like more and more members of the Constitutional Assembly retreating. There were more or less mostly Islamists left in this assembly, and this is not a good way. He could have tried beforehand to reintegrate them, to make signs to them. We want to work together on this very basic and very important piece of text we are producing here, a new constitution for Egypt. That is not something you just write in a little room and nobody should know about this. And we will have a referendum in Egypt about this constitution, but people are asking themselves, will we have to vote for the whole constitution, or do we get different articles to vote on? What would be the best way? And I think the more discussions will be there about this constitution beforehand, the better it is for the whole society and for the political process ongoing.
And Samir Nasir, you've all mentioned and criticized that Mursi did not reach out to various fractions within the country. Do you think that his inexperience is part of the reason here?
I don't know, but I would like to comment on this. President Mursi came to power because he got the votes of many people who weren't with the Muslim Brothers. And one of the main promises he made was to have this Constitution Assembly made in a balanced way. That was one of his main promises, and that's why he got many of the votes of the liberals and the people who said we can't go back to the old system, because the choice was to vote either for Morsi or for Ahmad Shafiq, who was the last prime under Mubarak. So that was one of the main promises, and I say it again and again. Now, if you say that all the judges, or many of the judges, just are remains of the old system, I would say this is very unfair. And if they dissolve the parliament, and if they were about to dissolve this assembly, then we really should see what their reasons are. And the reasons are in many ways because also the parliament, it was there were many questions about the election, there were many mistakes in this election. So I would really like to ask, is it really true that we can talk about democracy when we are not building institutions, and when there is an institution like the Constitutional Court, and we just dismiss it and say, well, they are remains of the old system. So I would really say it's a very dangerous way to define democracy as just building a parliament in any way and having any constitution written, and then say if people really try to prevent the country from being hijacked from a certain power wing, that they are just remains of the old system. Of course, there are some judges remain of the old system, but we really have to see that all the decisions that were taken into these very critical things. I wouldn't say that it's just a kind of revenge and that they just want to go back to Mubarak, because, and maybe we'll talk about this later, because Mubarak is gone, but the system Mubarak is in power right now, and we should talk about this later.
But this is exactly the problem, that the system Mubarak is still in power. I mean, you can see it in different places. Yeah. The police is not doing its job. So you have a security lack all over the country. So, and if we talk about the judges, I mean, especially the Constitutional Court was picked by Mubarak. And so you say they might have had reasons why they dissolved the parliament, but as far as I have understood it, we have seen the freest election which Egypt has ever seen in its whole history. So I wonder why the judges didn't complain when we had the last elections when Mubarak was still in power. I mean, these elections were real fake. And no one complained about it. I mean, the parliament was not dissolved. And now we have had free elections and the parliament is dissolved. So this is just, I mean, tells me that, especially within the judicial system, we have a lot of people from the old system. And it's a real problem for the whole process. Again, I don't want to defend the way Morsi is doing this. I don't think that this is the right way. I just want to say that the whole story is much more complex.
Yes,
and so we shouldn't forget, I mean, the people and the body which have most legitimacy is the president and is the parliament, because he was he was elected by the people as well as the parliament. So we don't have a parliament anymore. What would have happened if the second Constitutional Assembly would have been dissolved? You would have had a big vacuum. I mean, and who's going to fill it? This would have meant that the whole process of getting a new constitution would have been postponed for at least half a year or even longer, with an uncertain outcome. So this would have been a very dangerous situation. I just want to tell you that it's much more complex. It's not so easy.
Yes, but it's also very dangerous to have a constitution made in a way that many parts of the society don't agree with. If you see that in this Constitutional Assembly you had 5 women, that's really, there are so many scandalous things. So what kind of constitution would come out of this? And what you said, it was announced that the referendum would be on all the constitution. So it's not that people can vote on paragraphs. So in the end, you don't gain anything, and we really have to be clear about this. You don't gain anything by having just any constitution written, just so to get it done, because that is the way all Egypt had been working for 30 years. Like, do it anyway and let things go. There were huge mistakes made from the beginning of the whole process. Like the Constitutional Assembly should have been before, and we should have had the constitution before. All this went wrong for several reasons, but now we are really in a very dangerous situation, and that's why the many political fractions asked for a government of national unity, and really try to find a way to have people agree on something, and really I think it's much more dangerous to have a constitution written in any way, and then it goes through maybe with 51%. And then you won't have things won't calm down. if they are not done in a proper way.
And Thomas Hasel, President Morsi says the decree is necessary, was necessary because, as we talked about, because he needs to get rid of the old guard. He says the judiciary, as we talked about, is still deeply infested with people from the Mubarak era. Is that true, or just an excuse to put through his own will?
Well, I understand his motives behind this move. It is quite clear that there is what the Egyptians call the deep state still very much alive, and the old regime people are still there. Of course, they're in the administration, they are everywhere. And it's not that these people must be bad people, but they have their interests. They don't want to lose their jobs, they don't want to lose the profits they gain, etc. That's very normal. And in a process like this, the best way, the ideal way would be to talk to them, to discuss with them. How can we find a way of reinstalling the system? Some of you will stay, of course, or most of you will stay and work on in the system, but we have to change the rules. We have to, for example, promotions have to be really made out of quality or maybe seniority, but not out of some personal contacts you have or corruption. So it's all about changing the whole system, the mechanisms, the rules of the system. It's not just changing people. And what's a bit saddening until now for me is that President Morsi and the government didn't change so many of these rules until now. They changed the people, or they want to change the people, and now there's a new general prosecutor by Mr. Mursi, but this doesn't change the whole game. And I would like to see much more democratic reforms ongoing to change the system for a longer term.
And clearly you're not the only one, because whatever President Morsi's motivations might be, it is causing a backlash within the Egyptian society. Tahrir Square, as we said, once again the focus of many revolts, of many protests. Let's have a quick look.
The pro-democracy demonstrators in Tahrir Square have proven they'll stand their ground. They've clashed with police and resisted tear gas attacks. Though they're a diverse group, they speak with one voice.
We reject any kind of dictatorship. We want democracy, and 25th of January revolution was for democracy and for freedom. And today, I believe it's a clear indication of how people are insisting on their demands.
There's no other way. Morsi must back down before we go home.
Our only demand is that he takes back his decree.
Well, Jan Kuhlmann, we just heard a variety of voices here, people unified in being against Morsi's decree. Let's talk about the assembly that is supposed to come up with this new constitution. As Samir Nasir alluded earlier, this is an assembly that is made up mostly of people from the Muslim Brotherhood and even the Salafists, because others have resigned in protests. Now, Is the fact that others have resigned in protest, is that, if you will, the problem of the Muslim Brotherhood, or not of those who have taken themselves off this process?
Well, in general, it's a problem of the whole country. It's a problem of the Muslim Brotherhood, of course, because, well, if Egypt has a new constitution, it starts with a heavy burden. Which is not good for the coming process and for the coming years and for the democratic process of democratization. It's also the problem of the opposition, because they walked out, and the one who walks out, he doesn't have a word within the discussion.
Was that a mistake to walk out?
I don't know. Well, I think that we have to talk a little bit of democratic culture. I think Egypt is still on the way on establishing its own democratic culture, and you just see some kind of lack of experience, which is natural. I mean, the Muslim Brotherhood, they don't have any experience, and Morsi is copying a little bit the style Mubarak did, which is not real democratic style. But walking out of the constitution, I don't know if this is the right step. I mean, if you walk out, you are out. I mean, you can't add anything anymore to the whole discussion process. And to me, well, at least we should raise the question if this is really democratic. And of course, the Constitutional Assembly is dominated by the Islamists and by the Salafis, but people voted for them. They won the big majority in the elections. So if they have a majority, there's a legitimacy behind it. We shouldn't forget this. I mean, we might not like the idea that they dominate the parliament, but the people voted for them.
Samir Nasir, is that not indeed the idea of a democracy that...
Yes, but it's not the idea that the parliament writes the constitution, and it's not the idea that the majority that's in the parliament writes the constitution just as the majority wants it. Even if there is a majority, you have to respect the other people, and you have to respect the rights of other groups in the society. There is nearly no Christian, no Copt in this assembly. That's a big scandal, and there are many. As I said, 5 women are in this assembly. There are hardly any young people in this assembly, and more than 50% of the population of Egypt are young people. So this assembly is really a very it's a kind of Frankenstein of assembly. So you don't many people, and you know the people who went out, some people said from the beginning we're not taking part, and I guess this was a mistake. But many people tried to be part of this assembly, and they walked out as they said, as they really experienced that they are not able to have a real voice. So if you're just there as a kind of decor, of it, just as a kind of that in the end it could be said, well, it wasn't that bad. No, that can't be the process. And once again, if we talk about the system, it's the aim of the revolution was really to change the way the government deals with people. If you see in 100 days of President Morsi, and this figure is real, we have 34 people killed in police stations and 88 tortured in 100 days of President Morsi. So there is a big problem within the Ministry of Interior. And one of the big promises of President Morsi also was to reform the Ministry of Interior as one of the really remains of the old system. But this didn't happen. So in many respects, you have things that are not being tackled. So why is this? This question goes to President Morsi.
Well, I disagree in one point with you concerning the Constitutional Assembly. I think it would have been better if the Constitutional Assembly would have been voted or elected by the people. It still is the best way. Then it would have the most legitimacy. And now, I mean, the whole way how this Constitutional Assembly was built, to me, is very unclear. I see your point that you want to have every kind of group represented, but still the best way would have been just free elections. The Constitutional Assembly wasn't built like this.
Yes, but I agree with you on this. It would have been the best thing to vote for the Constitutional Assembly by the people, but that didn't happen, and we all know that
But this is not Morsi's fault. I mean, you can't say that this is Morsi's fault.
No, but of course, the whole transitional process was dominated by the military council. And of course Morsi also inherited a lot of problems, and as the military council inherited a lot of problems from Mubarak, but they didn't do a thing to solve it. They just made things worse. And as I told you, we all know that the parliamentary election that you like to name as the best and democratic ever, we know that there were many problems with these elections. We know that while these elections were going on, people were fighting and being killed in Mohammed Mahmoud. It was 1 year ago, and many people boycotted this election because they said the situation in the country isn't the situation to have an election.
But still, the result represents the Egyptian society. I mean,
at that point. But today, I would really say, and you could see this after at the presidential election, that there is a huge loss of power for the Muslim Brotherhood, and I really think it's very dangerous to build a General Assembly like this.
And Thomas Hasel, we're having this situation now where Egypt's constitutional court is now announcing that it will disband this assembly that is working on this new constitution, which in reply, the assembly is now rushing to announce and to present this new constitution as soon as it can. It's a bit perplexed, isn't it? At the end of the day, the constitutional court wants to get ahead. The assembly wants to present the documents
Yeah, well, it's somehow a flawed process in a lot of areas, and I mean, ideally, making a constitution is a very important thing. Should integrate, as we said before, a lot of groups of the society. Which way to go to find the right constitutional assembly is you can discuss about this for a long time. But the most important thing is a big majority of the people should stand behind this constitution in the end. And in order to get this, you should have a lot of discussions about it. I mean, I rarely saw any discussions about the question, do we want a parliamentary system? Do we want a presidential system? What kind of system do we want? Do we need this strong president who brought us in the past not always the best results? Do we want a stronger parliament, etc., etc.? All these discussions are not really there in the public, and I think this would be very important. But to come back to your question, it's really a difficult situation that apparently the Muslim Brotherhood and President Mursi and the government, they feel beleaguered by a lot of sides. They feel beleaguered by the general public somehow, which they call then very quickly people of the old regime, which is not at all fair if you look at the masses that were on Tahrir Square on Tuesday. They feel beleaguered by the old regime people, and they try apparently strongly to prove that they can do the job on one hand, but they don't think that people trust them, and so they do things like Mursi did now. By decree, he wants to put himself above the law, which is really a difficult situation. And you can only hope that all groups now, the so-called opposition, which isn't unified, which doesn't have to be unified, of course, but sometimes you need some compromises, and the government and the Muslim Brotherhood, they should really sit around a table and try to diffuse all these strong arguments they have. People like one man saying in the film, we want to get rid of Mursi now. That's a bit awkward. I mean, you just voted for him. That's the democratic process. He has now his 4 years. He should have his 4 years. So let's go on with that. But of course, you can criticize his decisions or certain decisions. He should not think that he now has to put himself above everything, because otherwise he would fail with everything. This would be a dangerous path.
And since you've mentioned the opposition, let's talk about the opposition here for a bit. It's made up indeed of a variety of interests, of El Baradei, of Amr Moussa, the former foreign minister. Does this opposition have anything in common other than trying to assault and get rid of Mursi?
I don't think so. I mean, you have so many different groups within the opposition that it's really hard to follow what's going on there. I mean, each of these guys has, meanwhile, its own party. Baradei, Amr Moussa, Abdul Monem, Abul Futuh, they all have their own parties, and they don't have they have common interests in fighting against Mursi. But I don't think that this is really a long-lasting unification. I don't think so. And they really have to ask themselves why they didn't unify much earlier, because then they would have been in a much stronger situation. It's also a problem of the whole problems we hear. It's also a sign of a weak opposition which is not unified. And the second thing is sometimes, I don't want to generalize this, but sometimes I have the idea that even among the opposition people, you have something like a lack of democratic thinking. Because if you talk to some people, they say, okay, yeah, we want a democracy, but we don't want the parliament to control the military, for example, or we don't want the parliament to control the state security. And then I ask why? Yeah, because the parliament is dominated by the Islamists. Oops, so this doesn't work. I mean, if I want to have democracy, if I want to have the power of the people, then I have to accept the outcome of the elections. And I mean, of course, there were some problems with the elections, but still there were the freest election which Egypt has ever seen.
But who said this? Like we don't want the parliament to control the military. As I know, one of the most objections against this constitution being made is that the military still has a very powerful position, and that ought to be changed after the revolution. So I don't quite agree with you, and I would really say that many oppositional parties agree in one thing, that we want to build a state of institutions, and that we were lacking this for more than 30 years, and all the problems we are having now is that these institutions are not functioning. And of course, the opposition had a big problem in uniting, and that's why they lost the presidential the presidential elections, because if Sabahi and Abu al-Futuh would have united, and that was at a certain point thought that would happen, they would have gone into the second round, and maybe they would have won. So of course the power of the Muslim Brotherhood is on one hand the weakness of the opposition, or the until now their inability to unite. But I would really say that in all their differences, they object many things that had happened in this process, like using violence against demonstrators, like not changing many of the ways the regime or the power behaved with people. And I really think that it's much too easy to say, well, now they're just against Morsi. I really think this is not fair.
And Thomas Hasel, the focus is now on President Morsi, but there are some people who are saying he's not even the problem, that he himself has a tough time controlling, if you will, members of the Muslim Brotherhood and, of course, the Al-Nur, the Salafists. Would you agree that it's not really Morsi that's the problem, but the people behind him? That he doesn't have the power, if you will, to control his people?
Well, that's quite possible, because the Muslim Brotherhood isn't a party. It's a broad group, and we had a lot of defections from this group in the past 2 years. And I think he all the time he has to find a way of getting certain powerful people in his boat. And I'm sure that inside the Muslim Brotherhood there are very different opinions about certain things. But I'm still wondering about how strong Morsi really is. I think the way of the space of his maneuvers are not too big. I think he really has always to listen to the United States with one ear, to the army with another ear, to his advisors, to his followers, to the people on the street, and he's not a really experienced leader, president, or politician. So I think he has a hard time to do this job, and I fear that his advisors are not always the best.
And Jan Kuhlmann, since Thomas Hasel mentioned the United States, obviously a country that has had a big influence in Egypt. Amr Moussa, in an interview, said the West should stay out of this. This is an Egyptian affair. While others are urging the U.S. to, for instance, freeze U.S. aid to Egypt until democracy will prevail in Egypt. What path would you choose?
I would agree with Amr Moussa. I mean, it's not the United States' job to interfere in the whole story, and it would make the whole very complex problems even more difficult. So stopping the money now from the United States, this would be a really hard weapon. I mean, if you can do this, if really should turn out to become really a new dictatorship. I mean, we have had voices that what we see now is worse than what we have seen during Mubarak, but I don't agree with this. I mean, there are some certain signs which we really have to talk about, which are really problematic. But in the end, I mean, you have people going on the streets; they are allowed to demonstrate. I mean, the press is very hard in their criticism against Morsi, and I've seen pictures on one newspaper showing Morsi as Ayatollah Khomeini and with a Nazi sign on his breast. I mean, the press is allowed to do this, so there are still many differences between what we see now and between what was during the Mubarak era.
I don't agree with you, because the press is allowed to do this for a time. We already have channels being closed. We already have journalists being threatened. People are allowed to demonstrate until now, but what is going to happen in the next days? What is going to happen when they really want to push this constitution just to get it through? The situation in Tahrir is very threatened. People had been killed. Every day are some maneuvers at the Muhammad Mahmoud Street still. And on Saturday, the Muslim Brotherhood had said that they will have a huge demonstration on Tahrir Square. You know that there are many other. That would mean, if these both would meet, that would mean a clash. So that's a big problem also, because if he's the president of the Egyptians, then it's very legitimate, not legitimate to use the Muslim Brothers as a weapon in this battle. So if you talk,
their right to go to demonstrate again, and if they're going to demonstrate on Tahrir Square, I don't see this at the moment I mean, they say this at the moment, but if they're going to do this, I don't know. I mean, they stopped their demonstration, which was about to happen last week.
That was a good thing, yes.
Yeah, so you should also see this. It's just too easy just to say, look at these bad Islamists and they don't want to have democracy. This is too easy for me. It's much more complex, and it's really it's their right also to go on the street and to demonstrate pro Morsi.
Yes, it's their right. But you've been saying that people are free and people are allowed to do this.
They're freer than they used to be in the past.
Not really. Not really.
I disagree at this point. I mean, it's when you're in Egypt, when you talk to people, 2 years ago, people were not so easy in talking out their opinions all the time and really attacking a president or attacking this and this person. I mean, sometimes it's much too much. It would be fine if people found their own common ground which they're standing on. And okay, you hear we are all Egyptians in the end, that's true, but it must be more than that.
Yes, but people had a revolution. People sacrificed for this. More than 2,000 people had been killed for this. So I think it's normal that something changed. But if this change is already in danger now and things are at stake, then that's a very sad thing. After just 2 years of the process.
It is, but this whole process, I mean, you call it revolution.
Yes.
It will show itself if it is a revolution or not. I mean, we are still at the very beginning of a revolution, if it will become one. But this means that a lot of things will still happen. And we have the problem that we have this Muslim Brotherhood that wants to stay in power somehow because they fear that they fly out of power very soon again. You have young people who have their wishes for the future, and they want more freedom, more democracy, etc. And you have poor farmers that just want to make a living, etc., etc. So you have a lot of groups that didn't have a voice before. They didn't have institutions to get their rights before. And this process will be a long process, as everyone knows.
Yes.
But it's very important that people fight this fight. I mean, it shouldn't be violent.
Of course,
yeah. And in this point, everyone should openly declare we don't want violence. We want some kind of compromises. We have to work together. If you're from the Muslim Brotherhood, if you're a liberal, if you're an atheist even, yeah, we have to work together. If we are all Egyptians, we have all to work together. And this is lacking until now, and this is what worries me so much.
But really, I think it's really not possible to say if there was a revolution. Of course, there was a revolution. The question is if the revolution will will reach its goals, if it will be possible to implement this. But to question if there was a revolution, I really.
There was a regime change, but there was no real revolution until now. Because a revolution means that you really have to change the whole system, which hasn't happened yet.
Yes,
so
but
it's not a real revolution.
But you can't do this in 2 years. So
exactly, but that's what I'm saying. It's maybe the beginning of a revolution. But I mean, I know this is very emotional for Egyptians. The revolution is now the new myth that they created. But if you really objectively look at it, the president was fired. That's it until now, and now we're in the process of making up a new system. Maybe, hopefully.
I would really say the most important thing about the revolution is not about changing the president. It's about the change that happened within the people, and that's the real important thing. And if you see the people now, people were very frustrated for more than 1 year, not knowing how to deal with the situation. And of course, what's happening now, people needed this, needed a thing. To go out and that people are doing this, even if they are threatened, even if it's dangerous. I think that's the real revolution, that the people are not afraid anymore. So, of course, there was a revolution, maybe not a revolution in all the way, but we're working on it.
In the minds. It was a revolution of mind. That's very important.
Yes.
I would never try to make this.
And indeed, we don't want any violence, says Thomas Hasel. I think everybody can agree to that. But the Muslim Brotherhood has actually called off a major demonstration, show of force, in order not to provoke violence. What do you foresee for the next few days and weeks to happen?
Oh, I don't know.
Give it your best shot.
You can't really make a serious outlook on the next days. It's very hard. It seems that they're going to vote for the constitution. I think the constitutional court will interfere as well, and it's really hard to say. I don't know.
Do you think it has the potential to turn violent?
Yes, of course it has. Yes, of course, there's a potential of getting violence, and I say it again. I'm totally against this decree, but I'm also against violence, and I totally dismiss that they attacked bureaus of the Muslim Brotherhood, all these kind of things. And I really think, but all the political parties said we want it peaceful. If there are some people, some chaotic people, or some people who are doing violence, then this can't dismiss the whole movement. That's very important.
And you are partially from Egypt. We hear a lot of people are saying Egypt is not Iran, for instance. They say, we're not Iran. We would never stand for Sharia law. We would never stand for a constitution dominated by Islamists' belief. What do you make of this, Samir Nasir?
Yes, of course.
It's getting close.
No, it's not really getting close, because I would still say that this is not the majority. And many people who voted for Mursi, because they wanted to prevent Ahmed Shafiq, wouldn't vote for him again now. So if you would have a vote now, the situation would have changed dramatically. And you really have to look at Egypt. You have to look at the history of the last 50 or 60 years. Egypt was always a secular state, although people were very religious, but they were religious even in the 60s under Nasser and under Sadat. So I really think that this whole Islamization in this way, this Wahhabi Islam that came from Saudi Arabia, this is not really fitting to Egyptian society. And I really think that on the long run, Egyptian society will be able to be immune against this. But it's a long way, and I don't think that Egypt can be like Iran by any means.
It is a long way indeed ahead, a bumpy road perhaps, and probably most certainly ahead for Egypt still. We will, of course, continue to follow the story very closely. I want to thank my three guests for a very spirited discussion. We'll see what comes out of it. A lot of people are saying that the Arab Spring has failed in Egypt. The jury, as I take it, is still out. It's too early to tell what will happen. I want to thank you out there for tuning in, and looking forward to seeing you again next week for a new edition of Quadriga.